Here's a long horror story for you. Deep in the woods, far from the comfort of civilization, there stood an abandoned house known as the Shadow House. The locals refused to speak of it, and any mention of its name would send chills down their spines. For decades, the house was left untouched, a rotting monument to something dark and unspeakable. One autumn night, four friends, Mia, Ryan, Jake, and Lisa, decided to challenge the local legend. They were urban explorers, fascinated by the macabre, and the Shadow House was the perfect target for their next adventure. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a sense of bravado, they ventured into the woods. The moon was a pale crescent, its light barely penetrating the dense canopy of trees. A faint mist clung to the ground, muffling their footsteps. As they approached the house, an unnatural stillness enveloped them. Even the crickets had gone silent. The house loomed before them, its windows dark like empty eye sockets. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking faintly in the breeze. Lisa hesitated. "Maybe we should turn back," she whispered. "Come on," Ryan said, rolling his eyes. "It's just an old house. What's the worst that could happen?" They stepped inside. The air was heavy, stale with the scent of decay. Their flashlights cast eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. The floorboards groaned beneath their feet as they explored. In one corner of the living room, Mia found a tattered journal. Its pages were yellowed, the ink smudged but still legible. She began to read aloud. "They are watching, always watching. The shadows are not what they seem. If you hear them whisper, run. Do not look back." A chill ran down her spine as she flipped through the pages. Each entry was more frantic than the last, filled with drawings of dark, talented, faceless figures with elongated limbs. One page had the words, "It lives in the dark," scrawled over and over. "Guys," Mia said, her voice trembling, "this isn't right." "Relax," Jake said, "it's just a crazy person's ramblings." But then they heard it, a faint whisper. It was soft at first, like leaves rustling, but it grew louder, more insistent. The words were indistinct, but the tone was menacing. The group froze. "Who's there?" Ryan called out, his voice shaky. The whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. Suddenly, Lisa screamed. Her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. The others scrambled to her side, their own beams illuminating her pale, terrified face. She pointed to the corner of the room where a shadow darker than the rest seemed to shift and writhe. "It moved," she stammered. "The shadow moved." Ryan laughed nervously. "You're imagining things." But then the shadow stretched, elongated, and detached itself from the wall. It grew taller, more solid, until it took the shape of a figure with no face, only void where its eyes should have been. Its arms were unnaturally long, its fingers ending in sharp, claw-like tips. The whispering returned, louder now, surrounding them. "Leave," it hissed, "or stay forever." Panic set in. They bolted for the door, but it slammed shut with a force that shook the entire house. Jake yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, the ink crawling toward them like liquid darkness. Lisa began to sob, clutching Mia's arm. "We have to get out of here!" Ryan swung his flashlight at the shadowy figure, but the beam passed through it as if it were smoke. The creature lunged at him, its claws grazing his arm. He screamed in pain as blood seeped through his shirt. Mia remembered the journal and the warning. "If you hear them whisper, run. Do not look back." "We have to follow the rules," she shouted. "Don't look back, no matter what." They ran, bursting through a hallway that seemed to twist and change as they moved. The house felt alive, its walls pulsating with a dark energy. The whispering grew deafening, voices overlapping in a cacophony of despair. One by one, they heard their names being called in soft, familiar tones. Jake stopped, turning toward the sound of his mother's voice. "Mom?" he said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Jake, no!" Mia screamed, but it was too late. The shadow enveloped him, and he was gone. The remaining three pushed forward, tears streaming down their faces. They found a staircase leading to the attic, and with no other choice, they climbed. At the top, they found a single window. The moonlight streaming through it was the only source of hope in the entire house. "We have to break it," Ryan said, grabbing a rusted metal rod. He swung it with all his strength, shattering the glass. The cold night air rushed in, and the whispering stopped abruptly. One by one, they climbed out onto the roof. Below them was a sheer drop into the forest. Ryan hesitated, but the shadowy figure appeared in the attic. its faceless head peering through the broken window. "Jump!" Mia yelled. They leapt, tumbling into the bushes below. The impact knocked the wind out of them, but they were alive. They scrambled to their feet and ran, not stopping until they were far from the house. When they finally reached the safety of their car, they looked back. The shadow house stood silent and still as if nothing had happened. But in the attic window, they could see the shadowy figure watching them. None of them ever spoke of that night again, but they all bore scars, physical and emotional. And sometimes late at night, they could still hear the whispering,